That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So
the US said, listen, this is our real, get lost.
That is correct, yes. Right? So what the United States is doing is slowly expanding its global reach. And the way it's doing that is by signing treaties with nations that are part of these choke points. So the Strait of Malacca, recently the United States has signed a military cooperation agreement with Indonesia. And with the Strait of Gibraltar, the Americans have signed an agreement now with Morocco. Right? So they're looking for the legal framework and justification to control the world's choke points, which would bring them directly in conflict with the Russian shadow fleet.
So at some point, you think the way that the war starts is the US Navy attacks a Russian boat?
So I personally believe that this will be a drawn-out process, and there's no real concrete flashpoint, because not only are Russian shadow fleet tankers being seized, but remember, Russian oil refineries are being destroyed by Ukrainian drones. And the Russians believe that it is NATO that is responsible for the sabotage.
So what do you think the catalyst moment is when this all kicks off?
I think we're already in the catalyst moment. I think we're already in World War III, because this conflict, it's going to expand outwards into a global conflict. And there's nothing anyone can do to stop this, right? Because again, you have these different competing visions of how the world should work. And the Russians and Americans are already at conflict with each other. So the next step will be the Russians come into this war on the side of the Iranians.
Do you think that's going to happen?
I think that's going to happen. Because according to Russian grand strategy, you have no choice but to save the Iranians. Because you're trying to promote this view that the world is split between the spiritual and the material. The Americans are the Antichrist. The Americans support individual hedonism. Whereas we Russians, we believe in humanity. We believe in goodness. We believe in community, right? So if you believe, if that is your argument, if that's your grand strategy, then you have a more obligation, a more imperative to help the Iranians in their time of need. And in fact, Prime Minister Arachi of Iran has recently visited Putin in Moscow. Putin personally received him and said to Arachi, we, the Russian people, admire your determination, your resolve against the Americans. And I think that is a sign that Putin has entered the chat and that the Russians will start to help the Iranians as this war progresses. So let's go back to this map, okay?
Okay.
And the Americans have a three-pronged strategy to strangle Iran. The first is to use ground forces to establish border operating bases to incite ethnic violence in the country. The second is to block off the Strait of Hormuz and cut off Iranian financing. The third is to strangle Iran and cause the people to rise up against the government, okay? If the Russians, so if things stay as they are now, America wins easily. But if Russia were to enter the war on behalf of the Iranians, the first thing that Russia would do is provide Tehran with reinforcement from the Caspian Sea, right? Because the Americans want to knock out Tehran's capacity to provide food, water, and electricity to its people. But through the Caspian Sea, the Russians can support the Iranians. But not only that, and this is much more important, if the Russians were to come in, they could also bring the Chinese into the war on behalf of the Iranians. And the Chinese could use the Belt and Road Initiative, basically the railway system, to reinforce Tehran from the east. So now you can no longer strangle Tehran because the Russians and the Chinese are reinforcing Tehran. Then what the Russians could do is provide financing to the Iranians. Basically, the Chinese and the Russians can say to the Iranians, don't worry about financing. We will give you enough financing for you to continue this war for as long as you want. And we'll use our resources as collateral for this financing. Right? And the third thing, and this is actually the most important, is that Russia could put Iran under its nuclear umbrella. And this would negate the use of tactical nuclear weapons. The Israelis and the Americans, if they really felt under pressure, if they were really put in a corner, they could always choose to use tactical nuclear weapons. If the Russians were involved, that negates that option. right? So if the Russians get involved in this war, they bring in the Chinese, they provide the resources and the financing to continue this war for as long as it takes, right? And now the Americans need to expand this war all around the world to try now to topple the government in Russia, because the Russians are the main backers of the Iranians.
And you're predicting that Russia will get involved here?
According to the grand strategy of Russia, the Russians have no choice but to get involved, because what will happen is that if you look at this map, if Iran were to be conquered by the Americans or the Israelis, the entire southern flank of the Russians are now exposed to possible attack. And that's something that the Russians would never allow to happen.
The sovereign flank, so this from underneath? Basically,
right? But not only that, but the Americans already have close relations with Azerbaijan. And they already have bases in Turkmenistan as well as Uzbekistan, right? So you can see how once the Americans consolidate this area, it can now attack Russia from the south. But what's most important is the issue of global trade, where like a counter to America's naval blockade is by creating a Eurasian trade bloc that involves Iran, Russia, and China. If you look at Russia's north-south corridor, right? If you look at Russia's north-south corridor, it runs through Iran. If Russia wants to access the Middle East as well as Africa, it has to go through Iran. Look at China's Belt and Road Initiative. It goes through Iran as well. So by taking out Iran, you've blockaded both Russia and China.
70% of people who add something to their online cart never actually buy it. And that number is based on over 10 years of research. But what I think is even more interesting is what the Baymard Institute discovered. They're a private research company that ran a study which found the average e-commerce store could increase its conversion rate by 35% just by making its checkout easier. Not better marketing or better products, but by delivering a smoother checkout experience. So if you're looking for an easy way to make your checkout process smoother, I want you to think about moving your business onto Shopify. It's the platform we use to sell the 1% diaries and the conversation cards because it's so simple and smart to use. It puts all of our inventory payments and analytics in one place and has so many AI tools to help us get up and running straight away. Not to mention that it grows with you regardless of the stage that your business is at. So if you're ready to fix your checkout process, sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/Bartlett. That's shopify.com/Bartlett, and don't tell anybody. I run multiple companies that have multiple sales teams. And one of the things as a founder of a company that's often confusing is you find it hard to figure out where sales are. So about 10 years ago, I started using Pipedrive in my former company. And it's also the reason why I switched over all of my commercial teams in my current media company called Steven.com to use Pipedrive as well. Not only do they sponsor this show, but they've been an incredibly effective way of scaling our sales engine over the years. Pipedrive is an easy to use intelligent CRM. And at its very core, it makes your sales process visible through one dashboard, a visual pipeline showing every deal, what stage it's in, what needs to happen next, and it's all in real time with no delay. It doesn't magically close the deal for you, of course, but it does replace complexity with clarity. If you want to join over 100,000 companies already using Pipedrive, you can use my link for a 30-day free trial with no credit card payment needed. Head to pipedrive.com/CEO to get started. That's pipedrive.com/CEO. I'll see you over there. So when do you think this was going to happen? If you were to give me a timeline of events you think are going to occur, what timeline do you think you're operating under? I guess one of the factors here is that Trump only has, 3 years left in power. So, he's presumably going to leave power at some point soon. So if you're Iran, you might just want to play it out and hope that there's a different leadership in place by 2030?
The political leadership in Iran believe that they can wait Trump out. So they're waiting for the midterms because they believe that in November, the Democrats will win the midterms, and then they will impeach Trump and basically constrain his capacity to fight wars. And worst case scenario, Trump will be gone in 2028, as you point out. There are certain problems with this. The first major problem is the national defense strategy, which we looked at previously. The national defense strategy, it is a long-term strategic framework for how America can control the world. And so one possibility is that Trump is just creating enough chaos for America to transition. When the Democrats come to power, if they come to power, they will institutionalize this strategy. And we know this as a possibility because in Trump's first term, he changed America's strategy around the world. And then when Biden came into power, he then institutionalized the strategy via China, right? So it was Trump who launched this terror war against China, and then Biden comes in power and institutionalizes it, right? So I think World War III, it's a much more long-term war of attrition. And I don't think that this war will end anytime soon.
You've made a series of new predictions. You've made 8 new predictions.
Okay.
I have them in this box here.
Okay.
I'll let you reveal what those predictions are.
Okay. This is one prediction. Okay. Okay. So this is the most controversial prediction. Okay. I predict that there will be a U.S. Civil War and Trump will get a 3rd term.
You think Trump will get a 3rd term? Isn't that constitutionally illegal?
There are things that are unconventional and immoral and wrong and evil and dangerous. And there are certain things that are illegal. Trump getting a 3rd term is not illegal. So let me explain the loophole. What Trump could do is this, okay? There are 2 possibilities. The first possibility is in 2028, he has his son, Don Jr., run as the president, and he runs as the vice president. And then when Don Jr. wins, if he wins, then Don Jr. could abdicate and Trump would be the president. And in the Constitution, if you read the Constitution very carefully, it doesn't actually prohibit people from doing that. It's not been done in the past. And like no sane person with any morality would do this. But that doesn't stop Trump from doing this, okay? That's one possibility. Another possibility is that by 2028, America is at war with everyone. There's a national draft. The president now has emergency war powers. And so he can actually suspend the Constitution and delay the election, which is what Zelensky did in Ukraine. So these are 2 different possibilities. But I think that given Trump's track record, given his personality, I think he very much wants a 3rd term. And I think that he will do everything possible to get a 3rd term.
He would turn 83 years old in the same year that he finishes his 2nd term.
This is a man who eats McDonald's hamburgers every day. He doesn't really work out. Yet, on the campaign trail, he's able to go to 2 rallies a day. And in each rally, just 50,000 people. And he will talk on and on and on. Then at night, when he should be sleeping, he's either on Truth Social, tweeting about the world, or he's calling up reporters and telling him or her some confidential information that he really shouldn't be discussing with the media. This is a man who is addicted to attention. This is a man who loves the spotlight. He's lived all his life in the spotlight. For him, death is to be ignored. So given his personality, he would rather die in office than live peacefully somewhere else.
And of those 2 strategies that you named, where he puts his son in and then becomes president that way, or, you know, there's a war breaks out, so he says he has to stay in office. Of those 2 strategies, which one do you think he's more likely to deploy?
I actually think that given his narcissism, he would prefer the first strategy.
His putting his son in.
Because that shows himself in the world that America loves him.
Okay. And it could also be J.D. Vance or someone else, right? It doesn't have to be his son necessarily.
Trump does not trust anyone. Trump has never had a protege. In fact, everyone that's really worked for Trump has been kind of screwed over by him.
Do you not think that if his son decided to run and then announced that the vice president was his dad, do you not think that there would be such a huge backlash in the United States that his son wouldn't win?
Well, I think there's a possibility that they figure out how to cheat in 2028.
Right? Oh, as in actually cheat at the election?
Right. So
at the poll booth.
Right. So let's go into Trump's mind, all right? His psychology. In his mind, he won in 2020. The people voted for him. But the Democrats stole the election with mail-in ballots and by rigging the election machines. Okay? In his mind, he literally believes that. So in his mind, he believes that this is actually his third term, and the people and the government, they owe him a second term, which is what he wants now. He wants compensation for having the election stolen from him in 2020.
I find it really, really implausible to think that Trump would run for a third term.
So again, this is a prediction.
Yeah.
And it is a test of the validity of my theoretical framework.
I was looking at some of the constitutions and the laws, and it says that the 22nd Amendment explicitly states no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice. Some theorists have tried to argue that since the amendment says elected, a person might be able to serve a third term if they were appointed to succeed to the role.
Exactly.
If they were appointed or succeeded to the role, e.g. by being vice president first. Legal scholars and the Judicial Committee almost universally reject this. The 12th Amendment requires that anyone serving as vice president must be eligible to be president. Since a two-term president is ineligible to be elected again, they are legally barred from being vice president.
So the point is, there's nothing explicit in the Constitution that bars someone from having a third term.
Mm-hmm.
And there's debate in the legal community about the spirit of the 22nd Amendment.
It would go to the Supreme Court, right?
And the Supreme Court is controlled right now by the conservatives. Trump appointed 3 of the 9 justices, and there's a possibility he gets a 4th later in the year. So it's entirely up to the Supreme Court whether or not he can run. And again, there's something explicit in the Constitution that forbids him from running as a vice president.
Okay. What's your next prediction?
My second prediction is there will be a grand bargain between the United States and China.
What does that mean?
It means that people expect that the United States and China will go to war at some point over Taiwan. It means a lot of people expect that China wants to challenge American hegemony and replace America as the global superpower. But China does not want to do that. China's probably happy with America being the world's hegemon because you have to invest so much of your resources into fighting these wars that back up your nation. China doesn't want to fight these wars. So what China is going to do is try to triangulate between Russia and the United States. This is what happened during the Cold War. When China was not actually on the side of the Soviet Union, China was part of the non-aligned community. And that's what China is going to strive for in World War III, where China may help out Iran, may provide financing for Russia, but it's also going to strike deals with the United States as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So I think that Trump and President Xi are supposed to meet at least 3 times, possibly 4 times this year, only this year. The first will be in mid-May in Beijing. And I think that they will start a process in which China and America come to an arrangement that benefits both economically. What does America want? America wants China to continue to buy US treasuries in order to finance the American debt. What does China want? China wants energy, resources from the Western Hemisphere, and it wants to access the American market.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason why China and America cannot come to an arrangement that benefits both. And Trump is very much a transactional character.
And what will that mean for the world?
It means that China is not really part of World War III in a meaningful way.
Okay, so they're going to do a deal. They'll continue to work together as friends.
China will be friends with both Russia and the United States as Russia and the United States fight each other.
Okay. What's your next prediction?
Iran is another forever war, and the United States will institute a national draft.
Iran is another forever war, and the United States will institute a national draft. So you think Iran as a war is going to tumble on for decades, and that the US are going to draft people, which means you're obliged to go and fight.
Exactly. Okay. So the logic is this. America doesn't really care if Iran is defeated or not. That's not really part of the American grand strategy. Iran right now, it's a perfect pretext for America to expand outwards and establish maritime choke points around the world and to force the world to buy American energy. So this war in Iran benefits America tremendously. So why not have it go on for a long, long time? In order to make sure this war goes on for a long time, you need ground troops. And you need a lot of ground troops. And that's why you need a national draft.
So what would a national draft look like in the United States? Everyone between the age of 18 and 25 has to sign up to the army.
Right. So most people don't appreciate this, but America has always had a draft. But for the longest time, it didn't really care whether or not you actually signed up for the draft. And starting in December, participation in the draft will be automatic, meaning that if you're between 18 to 24 in America and you're male, you'll be automatically put into the draft system.
From when?
I think from December.
This year?
Yes, that is correct, yes.
So between the age of 18 and 25, you think, and what does that really mean? Well, I've not really experienced that in my lifetime. So it means that if you're between the age of 18 and 24, either gender?
No, male.
Male, then you have to sign up for the army.
No, you already put into a draft.
Oh, you're already, okay, but you might be called upon.
That's right. It's a lottery system.
Okay.
Right. And this created a lot of backlash during the Vietnam era. And so they sort of toned it down. But starting in December, they just passed a law that says that starting in December, you will be automatically registered for
They've passed a law.
Yes, they have. Well, in theory, Congress first needs to declare war.
Okay, fine.
Right? That's a first step. And Congress has not actually declared war yet.
Okay. So you think there'll be a draft, and you think this war in Iran is going to trickle on for
a long time.
How long? 10, 20 years, like Afghanistan, or?
I don't see it stopping.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's next in your prediction box?
Okay. Okay, this is pretty bad. The world will move towards an AI surveillance state.
I feel like that's already happening.
I think it's pretty obvious. Yeah.
What does that mean in reality for the average person? Because, you know, we're seeing some of these big companies like OpenAI and Anthropic all sort of signing up to government military surveillance projects. What does that mean for the average person?
Right. So for the average person, it means two things. It means digital ID and digital currency.
Okay.
So what that will allow is for the government to basically monitor everything you do online and control all financial transactions. It can basically program your bank account. So like you can't buy cigarettes or you can't buy drugs. And this will allow the government to basically categorize everyone and put everyone into a certain database to monitor that person. And once you're able to categorize everyone, you are able to use AI to predict their behavior.
Isn't this what goes on in some parts of the world?
This is what goes on in China. And that's how I know about this.
How does it work in China?
Well, in China, we all have digital ID. If you want to access anything in China, you need your digital ID. So if you want to open a bank account, you have to use a digital ID. If you want to use any e-payments, you have to use digital ID. If you want to use a phone, you have to use digital ID. Okay, so everyone's part of this national database, and then what this allows government to do is basically monitor everything you do, because basically, depending on how you buy things, I can then extrapolate to figure out your behavior. And then I can figure out your thinking, right? And then I can create incentives in order to guide and control your behavior.
So in China, can they see everything that you do?
Yes, they can.
Messages you send,
Everything.
payments you make.
Everything. Everything. Everything you do online is being recorded and it's being inputted into the database to figure out who you are, what you want, and how to control you. And they think this is progress, by the way. This is progress because I'm making you a better person, right? I'm helping you achieve your dream. I'm helping you lose weight. I'm helping you avoid drugs. I'm helping you work harder.
Won't you be in trouble if you talk against this system?
Well, me personally. Okay. So I operate in a gray area where I do not interact with the Chinese internet. So everything I do is in English. It's meant for consumption in the Western world. And I don't talk to Chinese reporters. I don't talk to Chinese social media. I have no Chinese media presence. And I am not at all influential in China. And I prefer it that way because if I ever became famous in China, then they would obviously want to control me in order to better influence other people.
What's your next prediction?
Israel will achieve the Greater Israel Project.
So you think Israel are going to conquer the Middle East?
Israel has essentially already conquered the Middle East. The only force in their way right now is America. So once America leaves the Middle East, which I expect to happen, then Israel will absorb CENTCOM, which is the Central Command, the American military bases in the Middle East, and they will achieve the Greater Israel Project. There's no other power in the Middle East that can withstand the might and power of Israel.
And do you have a timeline for this?
The moment America quits this war against Iran, the moment that America leaves the Middle East, Israel will achieve the Greater Israel Project. And what's really interesting right now is that Israel is trying to drag this war out for as long as possible because they see this war as a way to destroy all its major enemies in the Middle East. You know, the Israelis have already said this. After Iran, Turkey is next. Turkey is next. This war is already destroying Saudi Arabia and the GCC, right? So the last opponent is Turkey. Once Turkey is brought into this war, then Israel will achieve the Greater Israel Project.
And the Greater Israel Project covers all of this region here from Turkey, Egypt, Yemen, Oman.
So the Greater Israel Project is like this, okay? So it goes from the Nile in Egypt to the Euphrates in Iraq. And it covers part of Turkey, all of Syria, all of Lebanon, all of Jordan, and parts of Saudi Arabia, which also includes Mecca and Medina.
What is your next prediction?
NATO and Russia will fight for Odessa.
Odessa? What's Odessa?
Okay. So if you look at the Ukraine front lines, right now, Russia is preoccupied in trying to control the Donbass, which is basically eastern Ukraine. Why Russia is doing this is that eastern Ukraine has historically been part of Russia. Therefore, most people there speak Russian, are ethnically Russian. The Donbass is also the agricultural and industrial heartland of Ukraine. So if Russia were to control eastern Ukraine, it doesn't really need Western Ukraine. And then Western Ukraine would basically become a rump state. It'd be useless, right? So the last piece to this puzzle would be Odessa, which sits on the Black Sea. The reason why you want Odessa is that it's the major port. And once you control Odessa, you basically block off Ukraine from the Black Sea. You have complete control over the Black Sea.
The Black Sea, is that the Black Sea?
This is the Black Sea, and this is Odessa right here, yes.
Okay, so you're saying that Russia will take Odessa?
That's correct.
Okay, so they'll control the Black Sea.
That's right. But NATO recognizes that if Odessa falls to the Russians, the war is over. And Russia will have achieved all its major strategic objectives.
Why is the war over?
Because Russia doesn't want to continue on after Odessa. It doesn't need
that's what
the
it
rest
wants.
of Ukraine.
What does it get from taking Odessa?
Once it takes Odessa, control of 1/3 of the world's carbohydrates. If Russia willed it, Africa would starve to death. The Middle East would starve.
Why?
Because Russia and Ukraine export a lot of grain to these places. These places are not food independent. They rely on fertilizer. They rely on food imports.
Okay. And Russia's using the Black Sea here to export.
Exactly.
Okay. What is your next prediction?
This is the last one. Please be good. Okay. I was hoping for an optimistic one, but East Asia breaks out into conflict.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Okay. So we've talked a lot about the Middle East, and we've talked briefly about Europe, okay? So now let's go into East Asia. And I think there are three major sources of friction and conflict in East Asia, and these could be potentially major flashpoints. The first flashpoint is, of course, over Taiwan, because China believes that Taiwan is part of its territory, and so it wants to take over Taiwan. Now, the problem with this is that recently, Prime Minister Takahashi of Japan has said that Taiwan is core to Japanese strategic interests. And what she means by this is that Japan has no resources. It's a manufacturing power that depends on resources from overseas. If China were to take over Taiwan, it can now block Japan from accessing the Strait of Malacca. And that is a possibility Japan cannot permit. So Japan would fight to ensure that Taiwan and China were never to unify.
Would they actually? Because China's so strong, right? Couldn't they just knock Japan straight out?
Japan has no choice but to fight. Because again, if China and Taiwan were to unify peacefully, Japan would be cut off from the entirety of Southeast Asia. And Japan relies on Southeast Asia historically for resources.
Why would it be cut off from Southeast Asia? Can't it just go down here through the Philippines?
There's a lot of resources around the South China Sea.
Okay.
Right? Oil, minerals,
Oh,
all
okay.
that. Yeah. So if China and Taiwan were to unify, basically Japan would feel a bit threatened.
And your prediction is that there will be some kind of conflict in this region?
Yeah, so that's the first flashpoint, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Taiwan. There's another flashpoint, which is Strait of Malacca, right? Because again, America wants to control the Strait of Malacca, but China recognizes that the Strait of Malacca is key to its economic survival. And so there's a lot of conflict over the Strait of Malacca, okay? That's flashpoint number 2. The third flashpoint, which I think will be the most surprising, but actually will be the most pressing, is North Korea. Okay? So let's just use game theory. We are the leader, supreme leader of North Korea. It is a dictatorship. Everyone worships me. It's a cult of personality, but we're poor. And the rest of the world is in conflict, right? Europe is fighting with Russia. The Middle East is in flames. America's distracted trying to control the world to the best of its ability. Japan and China are fighting over the South China Sea. If you're in North Korea, now is the best opportunity to create as much havoc in the world as possible. There's absolutely nothing anyone can do to stop you. You are the brawler in high school that no one pays attention to, but because all the big boys are fighting each other, you can come in and dominate the school now.
Who would they be dominating?
They could dominate South Korea. Because if you just look at a population map of South Korea, most of the South Korean population is located in Seoul, and Seoul is about 20 minutes artillery from North Korea. So in 20 minutes, North Korea could rain artillery onto Seoul and like basically a day flatten the entire city. Why wouldn't you extort the South Koreans?
Because the South Koreans are going to shoot back?
With what?
Do they not have military?
They're being protected by the Americans right now, and the Americans are busy transporting artillery and weapon systems, including the THAAD system, over to the Middle East. It's called THAAD, T-H-A-A-D. It used to be in South Korea to protect against North Korea, and now it's over in the Middle East. So Americans are cannibalizing both South Korea and Japan in order to maintain this war in the Middle East. Now's the time. Why not? It's free money. It's like taking candy from a baby.
But South Korea have their own military, no?
How do you defend against artillery strikes?
I don't know.
You don't.
But they would fire back, right? They'd get themselves into a pretty ugly war. South Korea have a big military.
Well, my people are poor. They're not afraid to die. In fact, I've sent thousands of them to go to Ukraine to fight for the Russians, and they fight to the death because they're poor and they don't fight to the death. If they're allowed to be taken prisoner, I'll kill their families back at home. South Koreans are rich. They are used to democracy. They're used to individual rights. So if I threaten to blow your city up, you're telling me you won't bribe me not to do so? Isn't the fastest, quickest way is to bribe me not to cause trouble for you?
Okay, so you think they're going to bribe them?
Extortion.
Okay.
This is extortion. I don't need to destroy South Korea. All I need to do is basically threaten the South Koreans, and they'll just like, bribe me not to do anything.
So what does all of this stuff mean for the average person? You know, people listening right now, they're just normal people. A lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them are just normal people getting on with their lives, and they care about their families, their jobs, their futures. What message have you got for them?
In this new world, we will need leaders. We will need average people who are able to bring hope to people around them, who are able to tell their neighbors, their friends, we have to come together as a community and become a family if we are to survive. That's what the world needs in the future. It will need entrepreneurial leaders. It will need visionaries. It will need prophets. Those who will most thrive are those who make an effort to reach out, knock on the door of your neighbors and say, listen, there's a blackout and there's probably no water, but don't fear, because if we come together as community, if we go and knock on everyone's doors, then everyone in this apartment building, and there might be 100 of us, if we just sit down and have a meeting and just discuss what's happening, one of us will come up with a solution. And one of us will help everyone else figure out how to find water or how to build a better society. And we know this because historically, this has always been true. When empires collapse, infrastructure collapses.
Which empire do you think is collapsing? The United States empire?
The United States empire is collapsing, yes.
And who is taking its place?
No one can take the place of the American empire. So we live in a unipolar moment. And the closest historical analogy to today is something called the Bronze Age collapse.
The Bronze Age?
The Bronze Age collapse. And this happened about over 3,000 years ago. And what happened during the Bronze Age collapse is that you have these established kingdoms throughout the Middle East and Europe. You have Mycenaean Greece. You had the Hittite Empire in Anatolia, which is present-day Turkey. You had the Mesopotamian Empire. You had the Egyptians. And one by one, they collapsed. The reason why was that a perfect storm of calamities came at the same time. There were earthquakes. There were famines. There was a climate crisis. There were wars. There were civil wars. There were revolutions. And so you had this massive surge of refugees called the Sea Peoples flowing from North and West Europe and sweeping food to the entire Middle East. And the reason why is they were hungry. They didn't have any food to eat. So they organized into these large pirate armies, and they overwhelmed entire civilizations. And so we will see a very similar dynamic play out in the world, where in the future, our concern won't be wars. Our concern will be these millions of refugees who want to flood into our societies because they're hungry. And they're going to come from Africa. They're going to come from the Middle East. They'll probably come from South America as well. So I saw your show with Steve King, by the way. Steve Keen.
Yeah.
It was a great show, right? And he talked about this, where, look, the world depends on fertilizer.
Mm-hmm.
And there's 8 billion people in the world. And without fertilizers, the world can only sustain, at most, 2 billion people. Well, what are the 6 billion people going to do? Just starve to death? No, they're going to migrate. And they're going to want food. And this is going to create a huge global crisis throughout the world.
I mean, one might argue that with the rise of things like AI and robotics, the cost of production is going to drop and there's going to be more, you know, Elon talks about the age of abundance and all these kinds of things.
But you have to grow food out of the ground. And you are using fertilizer to maximize the land's capacity to grow food. So you don't have fertilizer, you can have as many robots as you want. They don't have to eat food, we have to eat food.
So what is your, you talked about hopefulness.
Right.
Are you hopeful?
I'm very hopeful.
What are you hopeful for?
I believe that humans are first and foremost creative and resilient. And our abilities have become dormant because we've become too complacent. Western lifestyle have made us extremely lazy and fat. But the moment we're presented with a crisis, the moment that we find our families in danger, we're able to come together as a people and come up with all this tremendous imagination in order to make a better society.
Make sure you keep what I'm about to say to yourself. I'm inviting 10,000 of you to come even deeper into the Diary of a CEO. Welcome to my inner circle. This is a brand new private community that I'm launching to the world. We have so many incredible things that happen that you are never shown. We have the briefs that are on my iPad when I'm recording the conversation. We have clips we've never released. We have behind the scenes conversations with the guests and also the episodes that we've never, ever released. And so much more. In the circle, you'll have direct access to me. You can tell us what you want this show to be, who you want us to interview, and the types of conversations you would love us to have. But remember, for now, we're only inviting the first 10,000 people that join before it closes. So if you want to join our private closed community, head to the link in the description below or go to doaccircle.com. I will speak to you there. Professor, what's the most important thing we haven't talked about that we should have talked about?
So let's talk about the nature of reality. To explain the nature of reality, I'm going to explain Plato's allegory of the cave, which he talked about in his book, The Republic. Right, exactly.
This book?
Yes, The Republic, okay? One of the masterpieces of Greek civilization as well as Western civilization. All right, so this is how Plato explains the nature of reality. And so he uses a metaphor called the cave. So I want you to imagine a dark cavern that is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And in this cavern, there are hundreds of people lined up together. And they're all sitting in a row, and this goes on for, miles and miles, just thousands of people. And they are chained to the ground, and their necks are shackled, so they can't actually move. And all they can do is stare in front of them at a giant wall that's empty. Okay? Now, behind these people, and again, they can't see behind them, right? It's a great fire. Alongside this fire are people, okay? We don't know who they are. Plato never explains who these people are. They take puppets, and they project these puppets off the fire onto the wall. Okay? And when people see these shadows, they think that this is reality. And as such, they begin to create narratives to explain this reality. They create language. They give shadows names. They explain where these shadows come from. They create religion. Then these people decide to specialize. So some people who are priests who explain this new religion. There's some people who are poets that talk about the beauty of these shadows. And then you have teachers who teach about the shadows to children. And then over time, what happens is that these people fall in love with this reality so that they are addicted to it. So if anyone comes on and says, hey guys, why don't you look behind you and see it's all just a farce? These people will be so angry that they kill this person. All right. So I'm not sure if you've ever watched a Korean drama. Have you ever watched a Korean TV drama?
Not really, no.
Okay. All right. So unfortunately, I have. And these things go on for like thousands of hours. And for the first 10 hours, you're disgusted by the plot. And because it makes no sense. But by the 20th hour, you can't stop watching it. All right. The same situation here where it's a silly television drama. It's all fake. But once people watch too much of it, they want it to be true. Okay? And that's the nature of reality that we live in. All right. So certain things to remember is that what creates this reality are not the people in charge. What creates this reality is our imagination. Okay. So the first thing to appreciate is that everything is a hallucination. And this is something that neuroscientists have confirmed. So what we're going to do is we're going to take Plato's Allegory of the Cave, the framework, and then apply it to our reality to understand how it's created. Okay? So in the first layer, you need a power, a force, to put people in chains, right? And this is what we call the military-industrial complex of America, as well as the empire. So going back to this example, it's the layer that puts the people into chains. But now the second step is you need people to create the reality, to direct people's attention, to create the game. And these people are the financial elite, the Bank of International Settlements, based in Basel. So what do? These people are the ones who set the exchange currency rates. And they also allow for seamless financial transactions, the SWIFT system, basically. Then Wall Street and the City of London were the financiers. And then you have the Federal Reserve, the Federal Reserve System. Because the Federal Reserve are the people who print money. Okay. Now, once you create the rules of the game, you need to create the game itself, which is the global economy, right? Global economy. And obviously, this is a pretty vast system that encompasses everything, okay? Now, you have to explain to people how the global economy works. And you cannot tell people, oh, really, there are these secret people working behind the scenes that are projecting shadows onto a wall. So what you do is you create multilateral organizations that pretend to control the global economy. And they are the World Bank, the United Nations, WTO. You make people believe that this is all being controlled impartially for our benefit. Now, you have to convince people that this system is legitimate, that when you're actually seeing the shadows on the wall, they're real. And that's why you need the media. That's why you need culture, such as Hollywood, movies, basically. And you need education, school system, okay? These are the people who are all prisoners, who have become leaders of the prisoners, and who are helping them understand the shadows on the wall.
So am I in the media?
Yes, you are.
Am I?
Yes.
So what am I doing? Am I one of the people in the fire controlling the narrative? Is that what?
Yes, yes.
But I'm not owned by anybody.
That's what you think.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Who am I owned by?
Ultimately, it's the people who control the fire that are in charge, right? So ultimately, it's these people, the second layer,
Okay.
the game masters, the financial elite that control everything.
And the financial elite, again, are like the World Bank, you said.
No. The financial elite are these private bankers.
Okay, so are the private bankers controlling me? Because you said I was in the media.
Do you want to make money?
Yeah.
Then they're controlling you,
Okay.
right?
How are they controlling me?
Because they control the creation of money. And so now that you have the media, the schools, and the cultural systems helping people understand the shadows on the wall, these shadows now become internalized, and they dictate the values and norms of people, what they believe to be good and bad. They dictate habits and customs, how you live your life. And they dictate the legal system, who's punished for what, okay? And this becomes the top edifice. And what's amazing about the system is that in our minds, okay, in our minds, we believe that the system is, first of all, the complete opposite, where the foundation is actually the laws, the habits, and the values. When in fact, in reality, these are just figments of our imagination, okay? That's point one. Point two is that this is a very, very delicate structure. So if anyone doesn't cooperate, okay, then this edifice collapses. It's because it's a very, very delicate system, okay? And the third thing, and this is the most important to understand the world that we live in, as the system becomes much more wobbly, meaning that young people don't really believe in the shadows anymore. Young people grow up and says, are these shadows really real? They don't feel real to me. The system needs to become much more authoritarian. It needs to force people to believe what they refuse to believe. Because everyone in the system is incentivized to ensure this edifice is stable.
Do you think this is somewhat linked to what's going on with independent media?
Exactly.
Because independent media are asking a lot of questions about the way society functions.
Exactly. And that's why we're seeing governments becoming very worried about independent media. Because if you have people in the population saying, these shadows are fake, this creates a ripple effect. It causes people to start questioning the shadows on the wall. You can't have that. So that's why it's important to have censorship. That's why it's important to deplatform people. That's why you have woke politics, DEI, because it's an enforcement mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty hard. You know, it's not easy being an independent podcaster if you have a big platform, because you're not always the most loved by the mainstream media.
And they'll figure out how to eventually.
But I think that's very human, actually. I think the incentives are quite understandable from a human perspective.
Look, if you look at the system, no one's really in charge, and no one's a villain. They just grow up in the system.
And everyone's protecting their incentives.
Exactly.
That's kind of what I mean. I'm like, yeah, human nature is to protect one's incentives. And, you know, the media didn't like Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook because 70-80% of ad revenue went to Google and Facebook. So they had a bit of a war. So I kind of get it. People are trying to protect what's theirs. And disruption causes people to, I guess, panic a little bit, but makes sense.
But the problem is that over time, more and more young people are going to grow up and say, I don't see shadows. I'm pretty sure we're being lied to. In which case, this presents an opportunity to overthrow the system and create a new system. And this is why AI is important.
But we currently believe this one. We currently believe in this structure. It's really difficult, I think, for the average person listening now to accept the fact that they have believed a bunch of fundamental ideas and stories that everything they care about is sat upon. But I mean, if you've read the book Sapiens and understood that humans got here because we had a remarkable ability to believe in stories that maybe the orangutan could not believe. It couldn't believe in money and governments and religions and all these kinds of things. It makes perfect sense that, yeah, there's really foundational stories we are accepting, and that's what's brought us here today. That's what keeps me from running out on the street without my clothes on or doing other illicit activities, is I'm held in place by a set of stories that I've accepted, and they are stacked one upon the other to make me believe that everything I'm seeing and accepting is valid. But, you know, I guess the question becomes, am I okay with this reality?
And what's stopping us from creating our own reality that benefits everyone?
Is that possible?
Well, in theory, it's possible. But as you point out, there's certain people who are happy with the system and want to maintain the system. And that's why we're going to wars around the world. Because it's not just a war between different nation states. It's also a war for the fundamental nature of reality. You have the bankers versus the tech bros, right? That's what we're seeing in the world right now, where for the longest time, Wall Street has controlled America. But now with the Trump revolution, you have Palantir. You have people like Larry Ellison, Peter Thiel, Sam Altman, who want to create Operation Stargate, which gives them complete control over people's imagination.
You can knock it over now.
Okay. And everything will come down eventually, because that is just the fundamental fact of human history. Everything, no matter how stable it seems in the beginning, it all comes crashing down eventually.
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 Cyclically.
Yes.
Ray Dalio talks about the cycles through history and how sort of predictable they are and how frequent they are. Is there a frequency to the rise and fall of these, I guess, perceived realities or empires, as he calls it?
Yeah, so they say empires last around 200 years. And so we are now in the twilight of the American Empire. And what we know is that when empires decline, it's always for the same reasons. And it's always because of too much debt, too much corruption, too much inequality. And we're seeing that in America today. And the other thing that we know is you can't actually stop the decline of empires. So Oswald Spengler, who is a German theoretician, he argues that we are human beings and we have natural life cycles because we're organisms. Well, societies are the same way, where empires, they will be born, they'll rise, and they'll die. And it's a good thing, because that's what allows for constant human innovation.
Do you think that will happen in my lifetime? I'm 30 years old, 33 years old.
It may happen in everyone's lifetime. It may happen in the next 5 to 10 years. We are seeing...
Do you think that's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years?
I think there's a very strong possibility that the American empire will collapse in the next 5 to 10 years, because it is overstretched, it's in too much debt, and it is really angering the entire world. It's basically unifying the entire world against it right now.
And if that is to be the case, what would you give me as advice as a 33-year-old? What actions should I be thinking about taking now, based on what you know about history, to make sure that, you know, it's not too bad for myself? I guess I'm asking this question in light of you predicting that there might be a collapse of the sort of Western or the American empire. And in such a scenario, I was wondering what it would look like to be an American. And is there a solution or a course of behavior one should take in such a scenario? But I guess that's the key question, which is, if the US empire does collapse, how does American life change or Western life change? Okay, so one theory that's very important to understand is something called Hermetic philosophy. And Hermetic philosophy is what underpins Plato's Allegory of the Cave. Mm-hmm. And Hermetic philosophy comes from Egypt. And it has certain principles, but its main principle is that reality is energy, it's vibrations. Okay, so we think of it as material, but material is a consequence of energy, mm-hmm. right? So what this means is that reality is consciousness itself. Mm-hmm. So our thoughts are what's real. Our bodies are just vehicles to experience the world around us, but they're not real. When we die, our souls return to the source, and we come back again. And we're here primarily in order to experience things we cannot experience in the spiritual world, because in the spiritual world, it's not material. Mm-hmm. Okay? So what's really important is to appreciate that every one of us is part of the source. And so if we think about the totality of things, we can only become despondent. We can only give up hope. But if we think about how individually we can become a better person and how we can impact the people around us, then that becomes reflected onto the reality itself, because we're just part of God itself, right? So the idea is as above, so below, as below, so above, meaning that we are each and every one of us fractals of God. Mm-hmm. So if we choose to be a good person, this makes the world a better place. If we choose to be a bad person, it also makes the world a worse place. So it's not really about how can I stop these wars from happening, because you cannot. It's not really about where can I put my money to generate more income, because that's not going to happen. It's really about how do I live my life to the fullest?
how do I become a much more creative individual that brings goodness to the people around me?